Thanks, Kat. Hi. Welcome to Ghost of Bacon. I'm your host, Jake Roberts. That's everything I just said a few minutes ago. And welcome to my July 7th, 2024 podcast of this show. This is episode number 71. Pretty pleased with that. Unfortunately, this evening, we have had a few setbacks here at the Ghosts of Bacon. As many of you know, my original Facebook account was hacked in spite of the fact that I had two-factor authentication. It can happen if someone in the know compromises one of your passwords, and I believe that's what happened to me. So, and when we look at this, what it did was it locked me out of my Ghosts of Bacon business account. It locked me out of being the admin of our group, unfortunately. And so even though I made a few people admins of my business page, they're not admins of the group page. And because I set up the filtering principles of membership to the group, my new account is far too new to be allowed to be a member, and I can't regain that. So until further notice, I'm going to be posting, relevant posts about the podcast in my personal account, and I'm going to have friends and members of the show, members of the Facebook group, to share that into the group so people will be in the know. That's going to be my workaround for now. And what I started to say was a few weeks ago, I think a month ago, right after my book came out, and I made that bombshell announcement about Sir Walter Raleigh, that I would give an overview of my book as a whole, the keys of the Rosi Crosse and the Ghost of Bacon. That's what it looks like now. It's rather heavy and thoroughly researched, I assure you, and you'll be able to see that for yourself if you pick yourself up a copy. So until further notice, I'm only going to be able to broadcast only to you on the YouTube side. So if you see people in our group looking for the podcast, or in our Oak Island group looking for the podcast, tell them to come over here to the dark side on YouTube, and they'll be able to join us here live. So, all right, the last comments I had were that I was muted and no sound, but I think I fixed that, hopefully, because I've been rambling on here for about 3 or 4 minutes now. Carolyn, that's really interesting. Renaissance Lives, Portraits of an Age by Theodore K. Rabb. Includes biographies of Walter Raleigh and Catherine de' Medici. That sounds like a must read as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to have to pick that up. Thanks for the recommend. Obviously, as many of you know, both of those names are prominent in my research. And so for tonight's show, what I really wanted to do is kind of go through the table of contents here of my book and just give you the highlights as I see it of all of the corroborating evidence that Sir Francis Bacon was the son of Mary Queen of Scots and Francis II, along with the astounding information that he also had a twin brother who later became the man we know as Walter Raleigh. And so to start it off, what I do is the first chapter is simply called The Story. I give the background information of the story of how I discovered this, and along with what the overview is. in terms of the um, story that I uncovered. And the when we look at this, and I believe me, the unbelievability of the message is not lost on me. I said this, in the last two podcasts, especially the last one with my good friend Jason Mercer, whose own research is corroborating everything I've done, and then some, along with my good friends uh, John Edwards and Will Russell. So I give the background story, but then I also give some explanatory notes, in terms of some of the phraseology I use when I refer to simply the funerary monument plaque. Obviously, I'm talking about the messages I uncovered in the plaque that adorns the funerary monument of William Shakespeare in Holy Trinity Church in Stratford-upon-Avon. So those are the kinds of things that I explain when I refer to the plaque text or the plaque ciphertext. That's what I mean. So there's a whole, basically a a list of terms that I use and explanations of them, so that people, as you continue to read, you're going to understand what I'm referring to. And I think that this makes this book far easier to understand than my first two. In the next chapter, it's called History, the Pursuit of Truth, and the Role of Ciphers. In it, I go into the history of Baconian ciphers and what has been done in the past and how they messed it up. I also go into the critics of those people who messed it up. They were a little bit too harsh, in my opinion, though not much. William and Elizabeth Friedman. William Friedman was the father of the modern NSA here in the United States. And he and his wife were experts in cryptology, and they, for all intents and purposes, helped us win World Wars I and II. These people were brilliant. And their very first love was, Shakespeare and the Baconian question. And so they give would-be decryptologists advice on how to proceed. And that's how I was able to do what I did. I actually followed their advice. And so I also talk about and debunk the debunkers of the Baconian question. David Kahn, one of the giants when it comes to cryptanalysis and cryptology, devoted an entire chapter in his very famous book dedicated simply to bash Baconian cipher people. And he does so in a most heavy-handed and what's the word? Propagandist way, that I took the time to actually debunk that debunker. And I think I did a pretty good job in handling that. And so I spent an entire time basically reestablishing the legitimacy of what it is I do. Then in the following chapter, I called The Hidden Autobiography. Of course, I kind of summarized some of my findings in my first book. You see over here on over my right shoulder, the Holy Trinity Decryption, and kind of basically give a summary of how I discovered that Sir Francis Bacon was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and Francis II of France. And then I start jumping into the new evidence, the new decryptions. The next chapter is called Rosi Crosse by Any Other Name, and it's the alias formula. And so I go into many of the aliases of Sir Francis Bacon as well as Sir Walter Raleigh. And I talk about the alias formula itself and really kind of get into that. And that's a rather lengthy chapter in and of itself. The chapter that follows that is The Curious Case of Sir Walter Raleigh, where I pile up the evidence, the corroborating evidence that, yes, he was indeed the twin of Sir Francis Bacon. As crazy as it sounds, yes, I know. The corroborating evidence is unequivocal, in my opinion. And I think people, when you read this book is accessible. You're going to be able to understand it. It just spells it out very, very plainly. After that, I kind of delve into the Fama Fraternitatis, Rosi Crosse, and the connection to modern speculative Freemasonry. And so getting into that, what I did was I basically connected all the dots along with the actual cipher decryptions. The decryptions themselves, I tried to keep them out of the narrative simply because that was one of the criticisms of my first book. My first book was, a heavy read because I step by step was in that book explaining the act of discovery, how I did what I did, what it was like as an experience, how I began. At the very opening chapters, I say I'm still learning how to do this, and you kind of see me fumble my way through until finally I recognize by the end of the book, I learned how to do it and do it well. Um, and in this book is more about here's all of the depth and breadth of evidence I found across the board, whether it be from maps or portraits or other writings. And in that chapter, the Fama Fraternitatis Rosi Crosse and the Freemasonry connection, I actually show the decryption that states that Bacon states that my Fama fraternity evolved into Freemasonry, the first 3 degrees. And so, I find that really, really fascinating. So what I did was with this narrative, I saved all those heavy decryptions and placed them at the end in the appendix. So that you can continue to read it. And if you are interested in understanding exactly how I did the decryptions, you can kind of flip back to the exact page in the appendices and actually look at the decryption and the process I used to decrypt it. Again, step-by-step scientific methods. These ciphertexts are real. And so what I did then was I moved on to, I felt I really needed to go into the works of Shakespeare and provide some corroborating evidence there. And what I did was a very heavy decryption of Shakespeare's sonnets. I explained their structure individually as a sonnet, as well as the structure of why there are 154 of them as a very specific number that is unknown to Baconian researchers, and why it's there. And I think that once that happens, people are going to realize that there's a whole lot more there. And so each of these chapters, everyone, I kind of delve into it and I show the breadth of it and the depth of it, even though every single one of these chapters is deserving of a book in and of itself. And I say that, I think, probably in every chapter. So when you read that over and over again, I'm sorry, I repeat myself. But it bears repeating. Every single one of these sections, deserves someone really looking at it under a microscope. And thankfully, as you recognize from the last podcast, my good friend Jason Mercer came on, and he and I broke down what we had discovered in Sonnet 2. And that was just one sonnet of 154. In my book, I go over, gosh, I don't even remember how many, but I'll be doing my next podcast will actually be on the sonnets, I think, and go over some of the other discoveries that I didn't fit into the books. It was just a little too heady. But after that, I go into Bacon as a ghost and into his aliases. And the alias chapter, above and beyond just the alias formula, I think is really going to blow some people's minds. Particularly when, I finish up with a few of the aliases that don't appear in the ciphertext. Now, what I did was that at the very beginning of that chapter, I focused on the names that appeared in the ciphertext as I originally decrypted them in my first book, The Holy Trinity Decryption. So when we look at how that works, we have names like, obviously, the Shakespeare, but the one that people really found very surprising, but actually has the most corroborating evidence for it everywhere, Samuel de Champlain. Ottavio Boazio, Giovanni Battista Boazio. I'll get it out eventually. That was one that was very, very surprising. Tiberio Tonelli. I go into the corroborating evidence of Tiberio Tonelli in great detail and include the actual decryptions of a painting he painted of none other than Walter Raleigh's son, Watt, as posing as a German doctor. Really interesting stuff. You're not going to want to miss that. After that, I go into, I use as sort of the bookend here of Francis Bacon's philosophical death. and the last execution he observed, which, as I said earlier, was Charles I, his nephew, James I's son. He was there at the age of 88 and creates a self-portrait in a woodcut that I've talked about on this podcast in the past. And I was able to identify two completely different decryptions. One, a biliteral cipher decryption in that woodcut, and then, of course, a transposition cipher in that woodcut as well. And the information that I was able to learn from that was pretty mind-blowing. I think you'll agree. Lastly, but not least, I devoted an entire chapter to include even more information about the alias of Samuel de Champlain that I did not have in the first book, but I continue to follow that particular rabbit hole because it's definitely the most fruitful. And so after that, of course, is the appendix with all of the cipher decryptions laid out in detail. So just looking at, oh, here we go. I refreshed my, there were no comments coming up for the longest time. Yeah, Ray, David's not the only one. That is the information that is by far the most popular and the most widespread. It's had traction for 200 years, and that's what I'm combating. I'll reach out. He and I know some of the same people, but we'll see. The problem is that there are so many people who are so deeply invested in this idea that, and again, the initial assertion, I think they picked up on the fact that he was a prince. Okay, their decryptions were partially correct, and this is the way this stuff works, gang. All of my decryptions that I find, I don't think are completely complete. If you follow me, I think there are parts that I'm missing, but they're by far more complete than what was being done at the turn of the 20th century, end of the 19th and early 20th century, and so the people who came up with that were using very faulty methods, and so their conclusions were that he was the son of Elizabeth. Not so. Thanks. I'll definitely check that out, Ray. Hey, Ayo. Good to see you. It's Kat, Ray, Lon. Glad you could make it. Oh, thank you very much, Lon. I'm glad you like it. And I appreciated your message to me. Really appreciate that and your support as always, my friend. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. Oh, thanks, John. I appreciate you. I wish I could go there and do it myself. Yeah, AO. Turn off any password options on all of your devices, as apparently hackers can steal passwords from that feature. Oh, good to know. At least that's what my friend's computer engineer buddy says. Well, I'm going to take his word for it because I tell you what, I keep my stuff locked up tighter than a drum, and it still happened. So, hey, Stephanie, glad you can make it. Yeah, I've been aware of his work for a very, very long time, Ray. And some of it I thought was just brilliant. And again, I know that he went into a lot of some very niche or fringe topics as well, which I tend to stay away from that stuff. But at the same time, I guess as a orthodox researcher, I would look at my stuff and consider it to be a fringe as well. So it's definitely worth reaching out to David for sure. I'll see what I can do. Here's the thing, gang. This is exactly what my book outlines. I like that word, Ray. Shenanigans for sure. These guys were traversing Europe using pseudonyms, using aliases, assuming names of sometimes of people who already existed, and acting under those names. Many of these people, as you research them, as I state in my book, this is why the subtitle is Ghosts of Bacon. These were the aliases of Francis Bacon and Walter Raleigh. And what they would do is they would all of a sudden, they would we would know nothing about their history whatsoever, their childhood, where they were born, where they went to school. All of a sudden, boom, they would appear here on the world stage and affect history. And so you're left with the question, where did these people come from? And when you discover that this was just a cutout, these guys are spies and they're operating on the world stage in a way to affect history. And my personal opinion is, and again, I haven't found a definitive message yet that states this specifically, but the one that comes the closest is in my first book, The Holy Trinity Decryption, over my right shoulder here, which states that, as Champlain, Bacon found his chance to rule his nation when he was the governor of New France. And that's what he and Raleigh were trying to do. New France was going to be, Bacon's territory, and Newfoundland and Nova Scotia fell under the operation of Walter Raleigh, under a couple of assumed names, which do appear in my book. And so the narrative here is that they wanted to be kings here in the colonies. The two thrones that they were both heirs to were already occupied, by the time they came of age. And at that point, it's going to be very, very difficult to kind of fight that tide. I think Raleigh did in in England with the main plot. Those of you who are familiar with that, the main plot was an attempt to usurp the throne from James I and give it over to Arabella Stuart, their cousin. In reality, I don't think it was intended for Arabella. I think Walter wanted it for himself and said, I have more of a right to this than you do. Francis doesn't want it. Hand it over. And James wasn't having it. And that's how he ended up in the Tower of London for so long. So, really interesting stuff. And so the big thing here is that, and this is why, what the work of Will Russell, Jason Mercer, Stephanie, Z Zantlow, John Edwards, and so many others, why, you guys actually reading my material and understanding it and recognizing, oh, you got it right, and being able to corroborate it from alternative sources is so incredibly important. And this is what the tide we're trying to stem here, of this misinformation that's already been out there for 100 years. And so many people unfortunately have such a huge vested interest in it being correct and me being wrong, that my information is definitely ignored. So the idea that other people are starting to really look into this question and understand the impact Bacon had on history and the modern world. There's one decryption I'll probably never really get into in this podcast, but let's just say I included it in the decryption in the appendix without comment. And it has to do with the alias or mask of John Dee, as used by both Walter and Francis. And Bacon states that as Francis, he was able to see the future and how he saw it. And I just leave it there without comment. I said, this is for you to digest as you will. My process of how he decrypted it checks out. The checking system that I use checked out, but he said what he said, and I'll leave it all up to you to kind of think about the implications of that. But it was certainly a rather interesting process. So, all right, gang. Like I said at the beginning, this would be a short one, but any other questions or comments for the good of the order here? As I said, to summarize, I give a background of the story of how all of this came about, explain the process, and I also obviously go into how to understand how the Baconian codes all interact, and obviously give a quick summary of my book. the hidden autobiography. Um, but then, of course, all the corroborating evidence of from the fraternity of the Rosi Crosse with the alias formula, uh, all of the Walter Raleigh information, I think is going to blow people's minds. Um, the Fama Fraternitatis stuff is cutting edge. Not to try to brag, but I'm thinking that when people see it, they're not going to believe their eyes, because you can always really look. People have always wondered who these characters were in the Fama Fraternitatis and the Confessio, and their names are only letters, and as you know, letters have values, and if you know the values, you can identify the meaning of those values, and that's what I did. It was a far more simpler process than I thought. And I think people are really going to enjoy that part of it as well. When we get into Shakespeare and the sonnets, that stuff's a little heavy, gang, but it's definitely worth your while. Make sure you try hard to, crunch the numbers along with me and follow the math, because it does indeed, all these sonnets tell a story. All right. Thank you, Carolyn. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Like I said, not a whole lot here this evening, but I want to touch base and kind of give everyone a quick overview of what I've done here, building off from my previous book. Adam, thank you so much. Adam says the book is great. If you haven't already done so, pick up a copy. Thanks for your endorsement, my friend. I appreciate that very much. I really took my time with this one. Obviously, it's been a couple of years. So AO, I've been cautioned about, kind of calling out that group, because like I said, the more I push, the more pushback I get. And then other people, unfortunately, now that they've been quoting my work, kind of don't get published in their publications. So I'm just going to kind of just keep putting this out there, and I'm not going to name names or any of that sort of thing. But there could be some Easter eggs hidden in my book about that. I kind of had to. All right, gang. Thank you so much for tuning in. And again, great turnout for only doing YouTube. And, like I said, it was a short one, no advertisement, but I definitely wanted to pop on and give this overview. And I know that viewers, if you're watching this on the YouTube side later, or if you're new to this channel, new to this show and watching for the first time, please make sure you click like and follow my channel. That open up avenues to advertising and those kinds of things that that I otherwise won't be available to me if I don't have enough followers. And so and yeah, as John says, yes, it's available on Kindle. I don't recommend that version. The tables and the pictures and the formatting tends to go a little wonky in the Kindle format for some reason. I've been trying to steer people away from that version. And yeah, Ray, it definitely is an information war. It always is, always has been, and always will be. 100%, my friend. Thanks, AO. I appreciate that. Yeah, Kat, it is curious, isn't it? So, yeah, Stephanie, I saw that you posted. Thanks for the shout out on YouTube. I appreciate you. The picture of my book. I hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions, always just reach out. And Kat, yeah, always great seeing all of you as well. Until next time. Two other things. My previous books, The Holy Trinity Decryption and the Oak Island Treasure Maps. Oak Island Treasure Maps, gang, I'm going to be taking out of circulation here in the next couple of weeks, simply because I have new information that needs to that pertains to Oak Island. And also, guys, I got it wrong. After talking with the folks at Oak Island and then checking my location and all those kinds of things, if you don't find anything, you didn't get it right. And so I'm not going to put information out there that's wrong. In the book, yes, I do have the caveat of these are my findings so far. However, I have new information that I need to include in a new book. I'll include a lot of this information as well without saying that this is the pinpoint and so on, with the exception of the 1611 Jerusalem map, because I think that's highly significant. So be aware that, I mean, it is one of my best sellers, obviously, because of the popularity of the show, but I'm still going to be pulling it from circulation because I got it wrong. And so, because of that, I want to pull out all the wrong information, and I'm going to be reworking my Oak Island information into something new. I think just for people who are interested in how the Rosi Crosse was involved, in my opinion. So, all right, folks. Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate that. He says the Kindle does have the search function, so both are worthwhile. That's true, John. I appreciate that. That is a good thought. All right, peeps. Until next time, stay safe and be cool to each other, and we'll do this again in a couple of weeks. I don't know if Jason's going to be joining me again with more information on the sonnets, but we'll be looking at that stuff as well. Ray, I'll definitely reach out to David, 100%. Thanks, my friend. All right, gang. Till next time. See you next.